Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait another minute just to let a few more people join, and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I think we'll get going. I think other people are still joining in, but we'll have a couple minutes of introductions as other people get settled in. So good morning and welcome to everyone who's joined our webinar this morning. My name is Danita Welch. I'm the manager for local government program services with the Union and BC municipalities. I'm going to be chairing our webinar this morning, and I will do a quick introduction of our panelists in just a minute. So we're here today to talk about what will be the 2023 funding for the FireSmart Community Funding and Supports program. We're going to focus specifically on the program design changes and improvements that have been made. And I'd certainly like to acknowledge with utmost gratitude the funding that's provided by the province of BC to support this program and the partnership we have with the First Nations Emergency Services Society and the BC Wildfire Service in terms of how we administer the funding for FireSmart Community Funding and Supports. Can we go to the next slide? Just as a reminder, FireSmart is actually trademarked, so acknowledging that CFC is the trademark holder for FireSmart. That's important for us as administrators, but it's also important for grant recipients, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. I'd like to acknowledge all of the Indigenous peoples on whose territories we live, learn, and work. We honor their connection to the land and respect the importance of their diverse teachings, traditions, and practices within these territories. I would like to also personally acknowledge with gratitude the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people represented today by the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, where our Victoria UBCM office is located and where at least the UBCM staff here today are all located today. I'd also like to encourage everyone to take a moment to reflect on the traditional territory in which you're located today, or the territories in which you live, work, and play. So here's our agenda for today. What I should have had on the agenda was a couple of extra things, which I forgot to put down. One is introductions and two is housekeeping. So let's just start with some introductions, just so you're aware of who else you're seeing on the screen here. Right now, we just have two of our UBCM staff on the screen. So Jonas Woodrow is one of our program officers with FireSmart Community Funding and Supports. Jonas is here to support the webinar today. And then Rebecca Bishop, one of our other program officers, who's going to be doing a part of the presentation a little bit further along. And we will be joined as well by Kelly Osborne from the BC Wildfire Service, who's also going to be speaking a little bit later on in the agenda. From a housekeeping perspective, I just want to remind people that we are recording the webinar. So that will certainly be a tool that folks can refer to at a later date if they want to, or share within your own organizations. There will be a link via UBCM's YouTube channel to the webinar We'll post that up on our website, and we can also send that to all of the folks on the webinar today. We also will have the slide deck available, so there's no need to scramble and take notes. In all cases, we certainly would encourage you to refer to the program guide with any questions you might have as a first place. I fully understand that the program guide is a long, dense document, but all the answers are generally there. So that is a good place also to go to with any questions. For the duration of the webinar, we would encourage everybody, if you have any questions, to please pop them into the Q&A. We will attempt to answer those as we go, if that's an option, or we're intending to have a relatively short presentation and going to leave lots of time today for questions. So we will not be using the raise hand function. We will be asking everybody to put your questions into the Q&A. And we will also endeavor to provide a transcript of the Q&A questions and responses on our website after we're finished today. One further reminder, if you do have colleagues or if you're interested, potentially you have more questions by October, we will be running a second webinar in October, just as we open the intake. So what's the agenda for today? You can see it here on the screen. We're going to talk about the program design improvements that have been made for the program. We're going to then break that down between FireSmart activities. We're going to look at some changes in terms of Cwrps and fuel management, a bit of a reminder about who the contacts are, and then, as I said, lots of time for questions. What we're not going to do is review kind of the overall program design that's been static, generally speaking, since 2019 when we launched this funding. Certainly, if you have any questions, pop those into the Q&A. But we've decided, for the interest of brevity and also just focusing on what's new, that we would want to focus on improvements and enhancements for this webinar. Let's move on. So I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca Bishop, and she's going to speak through some of the program design improvements and some of the information on FireSmart.
Thank you, Danita. So some really significant changes have been brought to the new upcoming intake for the CRI program. And this is based largely on feedback from communities directly about the program, from the FireSmart committee, but also as a response to a number of recent events that everyone has seen and or is very aware of, things like the heat dome and the impacts with the fire in the Lytton community. So for the new funding program, here's some of the very highlight significant changes to the program. An increase in funding is a really significant change. You will see that low risk communities were previously funded for up to $50,000. That's gone up to $100,000. And higher risk communities have also seen a $50,000 increase from $150,000 to $200,000. Another really significant change is the expansion of the timeline for all approved projects. Previously, it was only phased projects that had first prescription work and then treatment work that were given up to 2 years. Now, every approved project is going to be given 2 years. So you will have the opportunity to complete projects within 2 years. But if you finish sooner, certainly that's great. So this is going to be a large window in terms of your ability to apply. So previously there was a short window of time where we were accepting applications, and to provide you with the opportunity to finish up projects before applying for this intake, what's going to happen is we are going to start accepting one application from each community starting from October 1st all the way through to December 31st, 2023. So that'll be the tail end of this funding intake, and then a new intake will start after that for the 2024 cycle. So you will be advised within 90 days, to the best of our ability, about the status of your application. So if you apply right away, you're going to find out within 90 days. If you choose to apply later in next year. Again, that 90-day window will still apply. You will be eligible to apply for future funding 2 years from the date of your approval for your 2023 application, or after you have submitted a completed final report. So go on and talk about some things that we're going to be pursuing in terms of when you're eligible to apply for future intakes, this intake and moving forward. We're looking to see old projects get wrapped up. So prior to applying to the 2023 intake, we're going to want to see that your 2019 projects have been wrapped up. We'd also like to see 2020 and 2021 to be finished, your reporting submitted, or at the very least you have received an extension for good reason that you need additional time. There's always good reason and rationale why we provide extensions. So if a project has been extended from 2020, 2021, you will be eligible to submit to the 2023 intake. We'll be happy to answer questions about that and what that really means if you have more questions. So now I'd like to go into some more detail about specific FireSmart activity improvements. So new funding, we have now got the opportunity to fund you for FireSmart structural protection, trailers. So up to $45,000 per application will be permitted. It's going to be a structured process. So there's going to be 4 recommended phases for purchases of very specific equipment and training done potentially in 4 separate intakes to slowly build up your structural protection trailer capacity within your community. Critical infrastructure remains eligible. The eligible funding has increased a tiny bit to $53,500 per eligible structure. What's new is new construction is now going to be eligible. So any new critical infrastructure that has just been built and might need some retrofits and/or is going to be under construction, what is eligible is the incremental costs to move from the traditional construction materials you might have used to go with FireSmart construction materials. So whatever that marginal difference would be, up to $53,500 per structure is what you can apply for in terms of new critical infrastructure, new construction. Another significant addition is now community assets have been added as an eligible structure, set of structures to consider for FireSmart assessments, as well as the mitigation activities included or identified in a FireSmart critical infrastructure assessment or other appropriate assessment to retrofit those buildings. So it's labor and it's materials that are eligible for those kinds of projects. Also new is honoraria for cultural leaders, elders, Indigenous knowledge keepers, and cultural keepers. So that's really great to have that included. Expenses related to local cultural protocols are also now eligible for funding. So expanded funding also is relating to FireSmart positions. So there's now job descriptions and expanded training available for the various job descriptions, which include the FireSmart coordinator, a local FireSmart representative, wildfire mitigation specialists, wildfire forest professionals, and FireSmart crew members. So there's detailed information in the program guide that will talk about eligible training and talk about funding. So you want to go into close and careful reading of the program guide to understand those specifics. The rebates for home and property owners has also increased, so it's now $1,000 per residence. And that also is going to include new construction. So again, it's that incremental change between traditional materials and going to new FireSmart materials. That margin is what's eligible for up to $1,000 per structure. There is a new CWRP template for 2022. So any CWRP projects will be using that new template. And there's also what's called a FireSmart Roadmap being built into that. So you go from your CWRP and everything that you've learned from that FireSmart activities that have been completed, what you want to complete in the future is going to be identified in that roadmap, so you have a way forward in terms of how you're going to choose to pursue FireSmart activities. The upcoming FireSmart BC conference, again, will be eligible for people to attend, but it's increasing up to 4 staff per applicant and an increase of up to $2,000 per staff person. And the BC FireSmart conference is now going to be linked back to back with the Wildfire Urban Interface Symposium. So both attendance at both those events will now be eligible, which is great. A few other little things that off the top of my head that I thought were really great is that there's going to be up to $2,500 per location for FireSmart BC plant program materials. So your garden centers and your nurseries might be very interested in partnering in terms of FireSmart plants and educating the public about FireSmarting their properties. So that's really great. And there's also going to be funding for those life-size Ember mascots. Who doesn't love a mascot? I love me a mascot. It's going to be up to $6,000 to have one of those costumes, but they're pretty expensive. So it's going to be a regional allocation, very likely, about how many get distributed around the province. So you can reach out to myself or Jonas Woodward, as Danita introduced us, in terms of being the program officers for the CRI program. We're always happy to answer your questions once you start digging in to the actual application materials and you have questions. You'll know to reach out to us, you know where to find us. And with that, I would like to hand off the session now for a discussion of the CWRPs and fuel management. So I think I'm handing that over to Kelly Osborne from the BC Wildfire Service.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, folks. Oh, I've got a big dog in the background, not my regular FireSmart thing. So, yes, I'm just here. Can you just move to the next screen for me, please? Perfect. So just wanted everybody to know, I wouldn't necessarily call it a new 2022 template. I think it's just an updated one. There's some additional sections, I believe, off the top of my head that we had provided on structure planning. Danita can jump in here and help me. Recovery planning and a couple of sort of tweaks based on some of our learnings from 2021. So we expanded some potential activities. And I think we reorganized a little bit of the vegetation management with the FireSmart pieces, sort of pulling them out and carrying on with the regular FireSmart pieces and a couple of tweaks such as that. And I know, Danita, you're on the call, so I might just bore your brain, which tends to be better than mine. Did I miss anything on sort of those tweaks?
No, I think that's it. We wanted to make sure that the way we presented some of the information sort of aligns with the way we've developed FireSmart in BC versus some of the FireSmart Canada ways of defining some of the zones. I think so we tried to simplify some of the language. And then, like Kelly said, we took some incremental initial steps into having communities think about both response and recovery in a kind of a pre-planning mode, I guess you could say, within the CWRP.
Perfect. So that's good. Other than that, I think it's generally the same process as before. And we've only received to date, I think, 3 or 4, maybe more now, Danita, like half a dozen, let's say, have actually completed CWRP. So probably for 2024, we're really going to do a bit of a deeper dive into where we landed, what we're seeing, what we're learning, what's working, what isn't, and maybe update it a bit. But also, I'm very cognizant I'm not doing a whole bunch of changes every year. So we will be looking at that as some of the CWRPs come in and really comparing that to CWPPs and what we had received from the past. So, and then the other one, application review process, fuel management and CWRPs, we're going to shift the technical review or eligibility review to the front end versus the back end to hopefully be able to streamline the approvals, and Danita can weigh in here too. And some of the key learnings and feedback we've received from our proponents, and maybe getting things approved faster. So when the applications come in through this intake, the initial technical review and ongoing back and forth conversations with the finesse staff and the BC Wildfire Service staff for those particular components, CWRPs and fuel management, you'll be required to have that signed off review completed as part of your application submission. Now, Danita, you can weigh in too, just from a grant administration perspective.
Sure. I mean, so what it's going to look like is we've essentially blended what used to be an internal form with the worksheet that you need to complete to submit your application. It's exactly as Kelly's described. The intent is to ensure that you're sitting down with either BC Wildfire Service or finesse staff, you're reviewing your projects in terms of CWRPs or fuel management to ensure that what you ultimately submit to UBCM is already been vetted and screened to be eligible and in line with the program. So a couple quick examples based on the last couple intakes. For CWRPs, we had to go back to a number of applicants because the AOI or the WUI definitions or the calculations were not following the CWRP guidance document. And so which impacts how the cost estimates were done. So that would be an example. So now if you're going to submit to do a CWRP, you'll be sitting down with the WPO or mitigation specialists at Finesse to look at the AOI and the WUI in advance. So when it is submitted, we know it aligns with the guidance document. Likewise for fuel management, both prescriptions and treatments. Another example would be ensuring that what's being proposed is meeting the eligibility requirement of being within 1K of structure density of I think it's class 6 or higher. So that's another area where we've had to go back to applicants after they've submitted because we're not clear the application is eligible. So now you'll be sitting down, having the conversation ahead of time, and essentially completing a checkbox that's built into the worksheet to make sure that what you're submitting, again, is eligible and in line with the intent of the funding program. The intent is certainly not to be onerous or bureaucratic. The intent is actually to move applications along faster. And that's what our hope, especially as we move to the open intake, that it means by the time applications come in to be adjudicated, we won't have to be screening against eligibility. Back to you, Kelly. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's why I'm deferring to you. Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. And so a couple of other changes, and I'm not sure in the beginning if I missed it, but I can reiterate. We did update the benchmarks, the general fuel management and other benchmarks to recognize some of the CPI, I can't remember what that stands for, the Consumer Price Index from last year. So just recognizing some of that is built in. You'll see that if you're wondering why some of the fuel management and some of the other activity costs have been increased by a specific percentage, that is why. And then also just recognizing the cultural and prescribed fire stream and the work that the province is leading and building to be able to recognize some of the nuances associated with local cultural program protocols, some additional expenses for those pieces as well moving forward. And then also a new, again, I wouldn't say new means like a radical rewrite, but an updated prescription guidance document will be linked to this particular intake. What I generally do, or I work with our program folks, when the post-grant approval meetings are occurring for the current intake, that was, I think that's 2022 intake, the one that's been closed, is I leave the decision or the choice up to the between up to the community if you want to switch to the 2022 versus the 2021. So the minimum standard obviously in a 2022 program is the 2021. But if you see or recognize, every year we really want to improve and provide better guidance or better knowledge in our prescription guidance, we let that choice occur during the post-grant approval meeting. So obviously with this intake, the mandatory 2022. So just wanted to let everybody know it's certainly up to you. You're welcome to make your choice. As I said, we do try and improve our prescription guidance every year or every 2 years. So that's part of where we're going. So I don't know if I'm missing anything else you wanted on that one, Janita.
Oh.
Perfect.
So we do have quite a bit of time this morning. Like I said, we wanted to keep the presentation short so folks could focus on questions. I have been answering a few questions in the chat as we've been going, which we can run over again when we get there. But I might just take a minute just to remind folks, generally speaking, how the funding is structured. So when you open up the program guide, again, we get it. It's a big document. But the bread and butter is essentially table 1. So table 1 is going to show you the categories for which we provide funding, what the eligible activities are within each of those categories, and then also the cost maximums and the guidance we provide around acceptable costs for activities. So, if nothing else, if you don't have time to sort of sit down with the whole document, table 1 is at least where you want to start. It's also quite long, but there's a lot in there. What you're going to see is throughout the guide, there's, the language new in 2023 inserted, and that's going to help guide people to where the changes are over last year. For example, you're going to see the first activity now in table 1 is FireSmart positions. We've always funded positions for local governments and First Nations who want to have a FireSmart coordinator as an example. But now we've built those out as a clear eligible activity. There's 5 specific positions that we list. We provide job descriptions for all of them. And all of the training that's identified in those job descriptions is eligible for funding. So there's a small example of where we've made some enhancements. It's flagged as being new, and you can work your way through the table that way. The other piece I just wanted to highlight before I go back, because I see questions are coming into the Q&A now, is that on page 5 of the program guide, there's a box which speaks to, it says looking ahead, requirements for 2024 funding. So moving forward, starting in 2024, in order to be eligible for funding, a community will have to show that they have a FireSmart position, they have an acceptable plan in place. Ideally, that's going to be a CWRP, but it could be from some communities, a CWPP that's still relevant for their community. And they have a community FireSmart and Resiliency committee in place. So we're identifying those 3 pieces as being essentially the foundational elements for a community to operationalize their CWRP and to sort of most effectively engage in FireSmart work in their community. So you'll see in the guide, we're flagging it now. We're encouraging people who don't have those elements in place to apply for them in this intake so that come 2024, those foundational pieces will be in place. On the screen now, again, we're going to share the slide deck after, so you don't need to sort of scramble to write down contact information. But what you see here is the contacts for both UBCM and Finesse. The link for the BC Wildfire Service will take you to a broader contacts page. And what you'll find there is both the prevention headquarters staff, so folks like Kelly, but then also by Fire Center, the WPOs. I believe that that page is in the process of being updated because there have been some staff changes at some of the fire centers, but that is certainly where you would find the contact information for the folks that you'll need to be working with for your applications moving forward. So what I'm going to do now is move over to the Q&A. We already do have a few, Rebecca, if you just want to go up forward one more slide, just so we're on the questions slide. So we do have a few questions that I've already answered. So you can see those in the Q&A. And like I said, we will endeavor to get the transcript over to folks, but just in the interest of everybody benefiting from the first few questions that were answered, The first question was in terms of, this difference of going to an open intake and also having 2-year approvals. So just to clarify, you can apply either after 2 years from your approval or when you complete your final report, whichever comes first. So if you're approved for a 2023 project in January, you can apply 2 years from that approval. So if you're approved in January 2024, you can apply again in January 2026. Or if you submit your final report, your complete final report in advance of that, you can apply for the next year's funding in advance of the 2 years. So it's a whichever comes first scenario. There was a question from a regional district in terms of some funding. So regional districts continue to have the ability to submit multiple worksheet ones for FireSmart activities. That's capped at $50,000 per electoral area. And within that, you can apply for as much critical infrastructure as you might want to, recognizing that there's a cap to the worksheet and a cap to that activity. But for the structure protection trailer that we've introduced this year, it's a limit of $45,000 per applicant per intake. And then the other question that we had already had into the Q&A was in regards to cultural prescribed fire. And the question was whether or not cultural prescribed fire is limited to First Nation reserve lands. The answer is no. You can apply for prescribed fire, cultural prescribed fire, wherever that makes sense. And then Kelly did remind us, as long as it's within the 1K eligible WUI buffer. So I now see that the questions are coming in a little bit faster. So I am going to move over to the Q&A and attempt to answer as many of these live as possible. So a question around standardized wage rates for mitigation specialists and coordinators. We opted not to put in cost guidance for the FireSmart positions that are now listed in the program guide, simply because there's going to be no one size fits all wage that's going to make sense. In some communities, these are going to be unionized positions, and that's the union's going to dictate the wage. Other communities, depending, a local government may have a fairly prescribed salary matrix or index. And so we chose not to provide guidance for those wages. So I'm afraid that's not a very helpful answer, but it's the honest answer. So will there be funding for the new library program? Yes, that is in the program guide. You will find it in table 1 as part of the education. So section 2, line F in the program guide, in table 1 includes the new library program. So for those of you that aren't aware, the library program supports regional and local libraries, and it's a kit. So it includes the Wildfire Resiliency Literacy Kit, Ember activity packages, coloring contest materials, and access to storytime videos with Ember. And we are just in the process of updating our program guide. So the cost guidance is up to $550 per branch. So some libraries operate multiple branches. So you can apply if you have more than one branch in your community for multiple ones. So we have a question about the FireSmart and Resiliency committees. So the question is, does this have to be within the fire department district staff, and or could this consist of FireSmart coordinators and neighboring communities across a region? So certainly FireSmart committees can be local or regional. I don't think we're prescribing, sort of what the scope and scale of your committee should be. I would encourage everyone to have a look at the, I believe it's a terms of reference document that's linked to in our table 1. So you're going to want to go to then section 5, activity A. And that link there will be for the terms of reference. I think, and Kelly, jump in if you have other thoughts here. I think we very much encourage regional approaches to these committees, both for an effectiveness question, but also so we're not duplicating activities for communities that might be adjacent to each other, or at least very close to each other. Kelly, did you want to add anything on the committees?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the premise that we're working on is sort of self-organization for a couple of reasons. Obviously, for sort of efficiency, maybe knowledge sharing. A real successful community or regional district that's been involved can help some undercapacitized communities be successful, as well as understanding the threat and how the potential wildfire threat is going to be coming to multiple jurisdictions. And it really makes sense from that perspective to organize in a manner that is a chunked movie, for lack of a better term, because the fire is not going to care if you've got 4 committees. It's really going to care about the field management planning, or even the FireSmart planning, maybe on the edge of the multiple communities in the multiple jurisdictions. So we really kind of support that, and we can certainly help with the fire centers with just the information on the fire mapping, etc. But really would encourage that efficiency and sort of threat perspective on these committees. But we don't want to dictate what that level that should be, because it's very different all across the province.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm seeing a couple notes here that folks can't see the questions in the Q&A. I have read out loud all the questions that I had previously answered, and I'm now reading them out as we go through. So you're hearing them verbally, and we will, as I said, provide a transcript of them after. So next question, is the FireSmart position grant funded, or is this a budgeted position funded by the applicant? This is grant funded. So we will fully pay for FireSmart positions in your community, and it could be more than one position if you have a rationale for that. What you'll see again in the program guide is that we now have job descriptions with recommended training for a FireSmart coordinator, a local FireSmart representative, a wildfire mitigation specialist, a wildfire forest professional, and a FireSmart crew member. So any of those positions can be applied for. You'll see that we've amended worksheet 1 so that you'll apply for the position in its own section, and then that we would ask that you then divide up the costs of the salary against the eligible activities that position would then be expected to undertake. Next question is, what do you expect the criteria will be to demonstrate an active community FireSmart resiliency committee for the 2024 applications? It's a good question. I hadn't really thought that through. I guess we would like to see evidence that, you have, oh, sorry, Kelly, did you want to say something?
Sure. I would sort of go back to the terms of reference and a list of some of the potential activities. And there's also some information on potential members. And I would say we'd be looking for something that links to that. But again, I don't want to be prescriptive and say if there's 8 recommendations of the members, you need to have all 8. But I think that would be a place to start. And if you're building it, underneath that, the guise of the terms of reference and some of those recommended members, then I think you're in a really good place. So moving forward. And if you have any questions, you can always, talk to the Fire Center or Kelsey or myself as well.
And I think my answer was going to be similar, providing, basic information like who's on your committee, when have you met, have you developed any documents, local documents to support your committee. So, I think as always, our intent is going to be to meet applicants where they're at and for you to be able to provide the appropriate rationale or evidence from your community in order to meet that new criteria. And again, not coming till 2024 for the 3 foundational elements that will be required. Next question, can a First Nations nation apply in addition to each of the communities? So if you have a look at section 2 of the program guide, just to take a step back to eligible applicants. So all local governments, municipalities and regional districts, First Nations, which includes bands, Treaty First Nations, and Indigenous national governments with authority for lands and resources are eligible to apply. Eligible applicants can submit one application per intake, including regional applications or participation as a partner in a regional application. So a whole bunch of words there, but what that tells you is that if you're going to submit a regional application, then that's your only application, even if you're not the lead applicant. And to the question specifically here, the national government can apply either as the primary applicant with sub-applicants in a regional application, or they can apply as the national government, and then the First Nations within that national government can apply on their own. Important to note that if you choose not to do a regional application and you choose to do individual applications, that we can't fund multiple applications that are all for the same activity. So if you're all working on the same activity, the best bet is to submit as a regional application. Okay. Is there a recommendation for how you suggest municipalities or regional districts hire FireSmart positions, hired or contract? With funding approval cycles, there's some risk future funding doesn't materialize, and would contract positions be better? So a couple answers there. One is that we don't provide a recommendation. Again, many eligible applicants, both local governments and First Nations, have their own hiring and procurement rules in their own area that would dictate how these positions are hired. Looking at the risk, that's the FireSmart positions, I think is fair to say, is one of the main reasons that we moved the approval window to 2 years, so that communities have the certainty that they can apply for funding for a position for 2 full years, as opposed to the previous funding, which was just only 1 year. The next question is about vehicle rentals. So the question is, for the past 2 years, we are spending over $2,000 for a monthly SUV rental in addition to high gas prices that do not reflect the current mileage rates. Will the 2023 grant program allow local government to lease or purchase a vehicle? We feel that renting a car isn't the best way to spend grant funds. If we purchase a vehicle or lease, this will improve the longevity of the program. So if we have a look back to the program guide, I'm jumping down now to page 16, under additional eligible activities and costs. New in 2023 is the lease of equipment or vehicles. So you can lease a vehicle, but you cannot purchase one with the funding. So a question again about the FireSmart positions. Can they be a staff position or contracted? Either. Again, it's up to the local government or the First Nation to follow their own internal hiring or procurement policies to make that decision about how the position would be put into place for them. So from our perspective, staff or contract is fine. Helena from the BC Wildfire Service provided some certainty in terms of the library program. So for the library program, applicants will want to apply for each branch. The price per branch allows it to scale for their population size. So like I said, we are in the process of updating our program guide. I think it currently says per library, but it will say per library branch. Next question. Wildfire mitigation specialists require computers, iPads, and uniforms, not including operational gear for the assessments. Would the 2023 budget have funding for this, as we are currently paying this out of our regular budget? Will this be funded in 2023 budget? So we'll go back to page 16, which I believe is where the answer is. So we now have the allowance. So again, new in 2023, purchase of tools such as handsaws or loppers and IT equipment, which is limited to tablet computers, compatible satellite emergency notification devices, GPS trackers, and required accessories that are required for eligible activities up to $5,000 per applicant per application. So in that section, you can now apply to get the IT you need for your wildfire mitigation specialists. Okay, next question. We have an existing committee. Does the name need to be changed to a CFRC, or can it stay as it is for the sake of using existing banners, website, etc.? I don't think we're that concerned about the name. What would want to be sure is that it's meeting the objectives that are identified in the terms of reference document that's available through FireSmart BC. Kelly, is that a reasonable answer? No, maybe Kelly's not available, so I don't think the name matters.
No, it doesn't. No, I think it's fine.
Okay, can we add a line item for door prizes for community info sessions? I asked our finance department for a PS5 to generate interest from the younger generations. We got $50 gift certificates. Or is it possible to get a bunch of these FireSmart grab and go backpacks for our next session? So again, back to page 16. If you, I'm just finding it. So in the eligible section, you'll see that the purchase of FireSmart BC branded items for community events and or recruitment retention of volunteers is eligible up to $3,200 per applicant per application. So that's only if you're buying the FireSmart BC branded pieces. And then likewise under ineligible, we say that the purchase of non-FireSmart BC branded items is not eligible. We also, you'll see under ineligible, the purchase of emergency supplies such as first aid kits, evacuation supplies for community members or households is also not eligible. A question about where to find the program guide. So it's on our UBCM website. So ubcm.ca/CRI will take you to where you need to find the program guide. Couple more questions here, and certainly we have lots of time. So if you have other questions, please feel free to add them on. So training, some have taken training for Home Partners program. Is this program expected to roll out in 2023? So Home Partners rolled out 2 years ago, Kelly? And I believe last year was the first year that we started funding Home Partners. So it's been in the program at least incrementally last year and potentially in very small steps the year before. So there's certainly a link in the program guide, which will take you to the Home Partners information on the BC FireSmart Committee website or the BC FireSmart website. Okay. Does the FireSmart funding include purchasing promotional items, event tents, etc.? Yes. So I already answered the question around buying FireSmart branded materials for community events. If you look at section, and again, back to table 1, section 2A, you can see that we provide funding for things like banners, posters, videos that are specific to community wildfire resiliency, tents, vehicle decals, t-shirts, and then the Ember mascot. Okay, so, oh, I missed something. I don't think you addressed the purchase of uniforms for FireSmart team members. I'd ask maybe any other panelists if they want to jump in based on our work developing this. Did we discuss uniforms?
It's Kelly here. I'm not sure, Danita, is it mandatory to have uniforms or is that just a preference?
I think it's a preference. We certainly have in the past funded, you know, fire departments or FireSmart coordinator staff to have a branded T-shirt. So, for example, when they're going out to do, you know, door knocking campaigns and speaking to people, or they're at public markets or whatever it might be, they're, you know, they're branded in a T-shirt or something. So I don't think it would be. I think it would be considered eligible. There's no specific place to put it in, but I would say that under education, provided that you know the branded uniforms are reasonable in price, they meet our cost effectiveness requirement, and they're clearly to support eligible activities. I don't see why we wouldn't fund uniforms. Okay, we've got funding for wildfire mitigation specialist training, but we're unable to find any courses that are being run. Can you point us in the right direction? So you're going to want to contact Joel Hamilton. He is, and we can provide that contact information afterwards. If you want to just email us at cri@ubcm.ca, we can send it right out to you. Joel Hamilton is the Home Partners coordinator for BC. He's been running all sorts of training over the last year, so he would be the right person to talk to coordinate training for your community. Okay, we would like to run the Home Partners program, but won't have enough people to run through it fully funded by us. It would be ideal if you could post other courses so we could piggyback these and share costs with others instead of bearing the full cost for a small number of participants. So certainly we've seen communities apply to split the cost of training. I don't know if we've seen that specifically for Home Partners, but we've certainly seen at least in regional applications, but also in some single applications where, you know, I can't think of a good example, but maybe everyone's going to do S100 and it's cheaper to bring in, you know, the trainer to fund it in a regional way. And each application is going to put in, you know, maybe 3 communities put in a third of the cost each. So as long as it's clear that we're seeing how you're cost sharing it and we don't have any concerns about duplication, you can certainly cost share the costs for training with the adjacent communities. And just a note from an attendee here, uniforms and branding provide more credibility to the technician when dealing with the public. So as we said, uniforms can be applied for. All right, I'm seeing 2 more questions here right now. So let's look at those. Oh, this isn't a question, actually. A comment again about uniforms. Maybe not uniforms, but T-shirts and hats. We noted that jackets were needed as well for inclement weather. So again, I think we've addressed the question on the eligibility of items for branding your staff and coordinators. Okay, so I believe the only uniform one can get at the moment is a T-shirt or a toque. Is there options for additional apparel opportunities? Okay, so the branded stuff on the FireSmart BC website is probably limited to t-shirts and toques. We have certainly seen communities putting requests to go print their own T-shirts with, you know, a combination of maybe their local government or First Nation fire department logo with a FireSmart logo embedded on it. And I don't think we have any concerns with that, provided folks are keeping in mind that FireSmart, the logo, are all trademarked and it can only be used with permission. So I think what we'll do is just pause for a second. It looks like some information has also been provided in the chat for folks who were looking for links. So if you were looking for links, and then also there's Joel's email address for anyone wanting to contact for Home Partners. We don't have any more questions. It looks like we answered 26 of them. But let's just give ourselves, you know, 2 or 3 more minutes, see if any more questions come in, and then we can wrap up. And certainly, you know, this is not your only opportunity to answer questions. I'm just seeing that people can't see the chat. Oh, I see. So the chat's only available to people who ask the specific question. So if it wasn't your question, you can't see it. But again, we are going to provide a transcript of all the Q&A at the end, and everybody will benefit from the answers to all of the questions, including any of the links we provided. Okay, so a couple more questions popped up. As I said, let's take a couple more minutes. So we are finding that there are significant delays when requesting FireSmart pamphlets. Is there an opportunity to print locally rather than paying up to $5 a pamphlet at the Queen's Press? We know there were some delays, so we have an agreement with the Forest Enhancement Society of BC, who actually manage all of the FireSmart resources as a contribution to the BC FireSmart Committee. And due to their own internal staffing, and I think everyone can appreciate supply chain challenges and staffing challenges that we're all having, that some of the information was getting out a bit later than, or sorry, some of the packages were getting out a bit later than we would have liked, but I understand that those have all been caught up on now. I can't speak to $5 a pamphlet. I don't know what the costs are. In terms of printing locally, again, recognizing that FireSmart is trademarked. So anything you might want to print locally would need to ensure that you have permission to be using FireSmart material, FireSmart branding. And we also would want to ensure that what you're including locally is accurate information. You know, unfortunately, we have had people print local materials in the past that potentially don't represent the sort of evidence-based aspects of fuel management or FireSmart. So we certainly want to make sure that what's being printed locally is appropriate and accurate. Okay, can you please explain the training requirements outlined on page 33? Page 33. Okay, so page 33, so this is in reference to the FireSmart Structure Protection Program, which is new for funding this year. And then the training, so there's a list of training here. I'm going to say off the bat that the Structure Protection Program is coordinated by the Structure Protection Coordination Office, and all of the training questions would need to go to them. They provided that list to us. The contact information is spco@gov.bc.ca. And any questions around the requirements for training for structure protection should go to the coordinating office. The list here, though, is the type of training that folks would be required to have in order to be able to do structure protection in their community. Some of it is eligible for funding under our program, but a number of them are not. So again, it looks like there was a follow-up question in regards to the training where it says 5 individuals need to meet the following list of qualifications. Again, you'll need to go back to the Structure Protection Coordination office to talk about that number of folks. I don't know if that's prescribed or if that's recommended. So the best bet would be to connect with to Ron French and his team. Question, will this be recorded? Yes, we are recording as we speak. We will be posting this via UBCM's YouTube channel, also a transcript, also the slide deck. So give us a week or so to get that all organized, and we will send out the link to where you can find everything. And if you also maybe weren't here at the beginning, we also will be doing a secondary webinar in October. So over the summer, read the materials, start working on your application. And if you have more refined questions, then we're certainly happy to we will be offering the October intake and can answer more, excuse me, the October webinar, and can offer more answers at that time. So there's a comment, the imagery of the current FireSmart pamphlets are insulting to members of our community. So we need to make pamphlets that actually speak to our communities. So certainly I would suggest that you contact Kelsey Winter, who is the provincial lead for FireSmart, to talk about the materials that are available and how those could be altered to meet the needs for your community. Somebody has just posted a link to the Ember usage request form. I'm not sure if that's a question, but there is a form available if you are looking to use the Ember mascot for local events. Okay, I have seen the FireSmart logo on many fire danger rating signs, and the signs are not being updated. Since danger rating signs are not approved to purchase under the funding, should these signs be taken down? Unfortunately, that question is way outside the scope of grant administration. Kelly, do you want to wade in to the question about danger rating signs?
For sure. I think my initial response would be to contact the fire center of where you're in, or the WPO, the fuel management specialist within the fire center that will be in the contact list, because that's a fire center sort of fire zone. And if something's not being updated for those signs, I absolutely would follow up with the fire center as your first place, and then have the subsequent discussions, and maybe they do need to come down, right? But that's sort of a fire center, fire zone.
And it is the reason, so we don't fund fire danger rating signs in the program, and that's the primary reason we don't fund them, is the concern about them not being kept up to date. One last comment here, and it looks like, oh, so the link that was provided is in Ember in order to use the trademark. So we can certainly circulate that link with the transcript. So that is the end of what I'm seeing in front of me. I'm certainly happy to leave it open for a couple more minutes if people have questions, or we can wrap up and let people come back or have an hour back in their morning. Rebecca has kindly reposted the contact information. So if you think of any further questions after this webinar, after you've had a chance to get into the materials, there's the contact information. As a bit of a guidance, if you have questions that are generally related to eligibility or cost, or that are more administrative, you'll want to start with UBCM. If you have technical questions in relation to CWRPs, fuel management, then your best bet would be to contact either the wildfire mitigation specialist, or excuse me, the mitigation specialist at Finesse, or a WPO at the BC Wildfire Service. They are certainly the subject matter experts when it comes to fuel management. So given that I'm not seeing anything else pop up, I think we're going to wrap up the webinar there. I'd like to certainly thank our panelists today for coming on board and answering questions and providing information. And then to thank everybody who's joined us today for spending your part of your morning with us, for being engaged in FireSmart. And we certainly look forward to further conversations and contacts as we get closer to the October, the opening of the intake in October. So thanks everyone, and have a lovely day.